And so let's go ahead and move on and get into the talk about sets, variable presets, and modes. Okay. So we'll start by talking about sets. And sets have been in OpenVSP since since the first OpenVSP. No, since the first version 3. And what a set is a way of organizing the parts in your model by the purpose, what you're going to do with those parts. And so what this really means is that when you're doing different analyses, when you're doing different things with your model, you don't really need all the components all the time. For example, if you're doing aerodynamic analysis, you only need the OML components, and you don't need, the parts on the inside. Whereas if you're doing a mass properties analysis, you're going to need those parts. And so sets allow you to group the parts of your model, the components, based on what you're going to do with them. So every geom, whether it's a wing or a pod or fuselage, it can be a member of more than one set. You can name the sets, and then you can think of it as sets are the noun, that then the analyses are the verb. We're going to perform an action on a set. So that's one way to think about it. These are everywhere in OpenVSP. Every analysis, every export has them. The API supports them, and they're really used everywhere. Sometimes you might even want to have pseudo duplicate components in different sets. For example, I often have a cruise clean wing in a set, and then if I have high lift components or so a dirty configuration, I'll have those components in a different set. So that's one use. Or I might have a complete wing, and maybe this wing has complicated winglets and complicated planform brakes, and that'll be the real wing. But then I want a very simplified single trapezoidal wing to act as my reference wing, because I'm non-dimensionalizing it by an idealized trapezoidal wing. So then I'll have another wing that's my reference wing, and it'll just be in a different set. So there's lots of ways you can use this. And I will say sets are a power feature, right? A lot of new users don't even know they're there. They don't use it. They don't understand it. And but once you figured it out, once you understand them, you're going to wonder how you ever used VSP without sets. They're just that kind of a feature. As I said, any geom on the general tab, there's this set list, and it's a checkbox. So we've got the names of the sets here, the set chooser, and in this case, the front wing. You can just come through and click the boxes for which sets it's going to be in. So obviously, any geom can be in more than one set. You do your actions on the sets. So sometimes, that's fundamental things are like show only, no show, or select all are things you can do to sets. And in addition to analyses, down here in the bottom of the geom browser, we see how to interact with sets with these fundamental actions. If you're using the API, people get confused because what shows up here as set_7, the way things are implemented, the first user set, so set_0 is really numbered number 3 under the hood. And so if you want to access set_7 through the API, then you're going to just use the enum set_first user plus 7 plus that n, and that'll be 3 plus n is 10. And that's how you'll access set_7 through the API. So that's just a little trying to document that here for people. It's a little bit confusing. Okay, if you want to get deeper into the sets, you go to the model window, you open set editor, and that'll pop up this window here. And you can see up at the top, you can change the number of user sets. So it defaults to 20, but you can increase to up to 1,000 sets. You can give them names, you can name them. You can control what geometries are in a set. So this is sort of the inverse of going to a geometry individually and telling what set it's in. Here you're going to a set and telling it all the geometries that are in it. You can, of course, from our previous talk, unsurprisingly, you can assign attributes to sets. So you can come in and write yourself a note about why you created this set and what it's used for. There's also some control here to talk about how copying and pasting set membership works, and do you want to copy that membership when you copy the geom. So lots of things to work with sets on a high level. There's another feature that also is lesser used in OpenVSP called variable presets. And what variable presets is a way of saving multiple states of a model. So you think every model is a collection of params, and all these params have variables, have settings. And what we can do is you can save different sets of params to a model. And there's lots of use cases for this. For example, any geometry that has articulation, you might want to save the variable settings, to save the preset with the landing gear up and down, the flaps up and down, the wings folded or deployed, the tilt rotor in different positions, swept forward, swept back wing. All these kinds of things you can capture through variable presets. You might want to have different resolutions in a model. So you might want to have a fine resolution version of the model and a coarse resolution that you use for different analyses. And if you're switching back and forth between this and doing it manually, it's a real pain, but you can use variable presets to make it very quick and easy to change the resolution of the model. If you're doing an optimization study, you might want to store multiple solutions to that optimization study as a variable preset. You can have the baseline case, and then you can have the optimized case. But of course, optimization depends on your objective function. So if you're doing an airplane design, you might say, okay, this is my minimum fuel burn design, whereas you have a different minimum gross weight design and a different minimum total operating cost design. And you can save each of those designs as different cases in the variable presets, and then you can very quickly switch between them in the GUI. One last example is any aircraft that has a variant. And now whether that's variants that we would admit to, like a family of airplanes, like a 737, a Dash 789, you could have different versions of the model that just change the settings and do that. But you could also make that a little bit more abstract. If you had sort of a generic twin engine, single aisle transport, or even wide body transport, a generic twin engine transport model, you could have different variable presets that you could click through and change between different Boeing and Airbus products. Oh, and like with sets, variable presets are also a power feature. A lot of people never use them, don't even know they're there. But once you've started using it, if your models and your processes have this kind of complexity, you'll be really glad that you use it. So like sets, there's a variable preset editor under the model window. You just go up and open up variable presets. And then there's 3 tabs. The first tab is just a way that you can toggle between different settings. So you've got different groups of settings and then different values. So the group of settings might be something like the configuration of the airplane, whereas you might have then a different group of settings for, say, the resolution of the airplane, or another group of settings for this is my optimization solution. So those are different groups of settings, and then each one has different choices within it. And you name the group of settings, you then grab a bunch of params, and then you get different settings. And so once it's all set up, you'll just use this front tab so that you can just switch quickly between different cases. And I'll demo this in a little bit. Under the group tab, well, this is both showing the group and the settings tab, but the group tab is where you name a group, you add a group, you delete groups, you can work with them, and then you can drag and drop what are all the variables that that group controls. So you can drag all the different variables down into that group. And then to control the individual setting choices, you go to the settings tab and you can name those as well. And you can then adjust the values. And so you can come in here, you tweak the values. And then if you want to save the values of a particular setting, you click update, and that'll update that one. So whereas apply will take these numbers and apply it to the model, when you click update, it'll take the values in the model and apply it to this setting. I hope it'll make more sense when I demo it. So modes are a brand new thing. It's been out, I guess, for some time this year. And what modes are is sort of a mashup between both sets and variable presets. So sets are a way, as I said, of organizing a model by purpose. We group components, and then we use that set to do an analysis. Variable presets say the state of the model. So it's values for a group of params. And so what a mode does is a mode is a combination of both sets and variable presets. And I'll have to get into this to show you, but it allows you to put both of these together and then apply a mode before you do an analysis. And again, this is mostly important when you have a model that takes different states, like say a tilt rotor aircraft or something else where you've got different states that you want to be able to switch between, say, cruise and hover, and you want to be able to then do different analyses depending on what mode you're in. So the idea is just like I said, you take sets and you take variable presets and we combine them together in order to make modes. And then when you're doing some analysis like CompGeom, instead of choosing the set, you can now say, oh, I want to choose a mode, and then I can pick between which mode. And what VSP will do is when you run the analysis, it will first apply the variable presets to make sure that you have those settings applied, and then it will choose the set of components, and then it will run the analysis. Just like set and variable preset, you access this through the model menu. You open up the mode editor. You have all the modes up at the top where you can name them, create, and all of that. You say which sets are in it. And so every mode can have both a normal set and a degen set. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about VSP Aero just after the break. And then you choose which different variable presets are going to be applied when you run that mode. So you can choose one variable preset for each group, as much as that if you want. And then, of course, following Tim's talk, unsurprisingly, you can then apply attributes to modes. So if you want to have notes about why you created the mode and what you're doing with it, there you go. You can do attributes. All of this is available through the API, so you can manipulate, and I didn't show the API for sets and variable presets, but those have API calls, as does modes. Sometimes there might be some confusion if you're looking for how do you tweak things a little bit deeper, but as it turns out, a mode is in fact a parm container. And so, and the normal set which you would choose is a parm. And so to access and change things like which set is in a mode, you use the parm container API in order to change that mode. And so let me just go and I'll do a quick demo here just to sort of show a little bit more about how this works. And if anybody has questions, go ahead and type them in the chat, and I'll try and look at them as I go. So here is a generic tilt rotor model, and we have both sets. So we'll come into the set editor first, and we can see this model has a whole lot of sets, and I'll show you why later in the day. But for example, we have a set of just the lifting surfaces. So I can come in here, for example, I can choose the lifting surfaces and I can say show only, and that gives me all of the things where a kata condition might be applied. We can come in and talk about and show a set of just the tilting components. And so let me show only, not show. There we go. So these are just the parts of the model that tilt and not the parts that don't tilt. The fixed components are all the parts that don't tilt. So that's, and don't move in any way, right? Because this wing also pivots. Those are all the fixed components. So we can use sets in that way. And again, we can control the membership and interact with them like that. Let me select all and show everything. Then we can come in here and we can go to variable presets. And so in this model, we're only using one group, which is the configuration. So this model didn't have, different optimization solutions. You could conceivably morph this model into, an Augusta Westland a 609 or a Bell 280 or a V22, so that it could be a sort of a generic tilt rotor model. I haven't done that. The only one I have is configuration. So we can switch to either the stowed, hover, or cruise variable preset. So here we are in cruise. So let's say if we want to go look at hover, we can apply that. Or if we want to go to stowed, we can do that. And you can see that it's just changing the variable settings. These are all controlled with hinges. So we have a hinge at the root here and a hinge at the tilt axis. And then we have the propeller folding like Brandon talked about yesterday. And so all we're doing here is changing a bunch of parameters to quickly change this model between these different states. So that's how variable presets work. Again, we have the groups of it. We only have one group on this model configuration, and these are the parameters that we're changing. the different propeller fold angles, and then the two joint axes positions of the hinge. And then the values of those settings are back here. You can see that for hover, we have different values, and these should be updating. I'm not sure why we're not updating in this list. I'll have to go look at that. Okay, so that's how variable presets works. And then really the new part that we're talking about today, the part that's novel and different, is the modes. And here I have a lot of modes in this model, and you'll see why a little bit later today. But what we have then is a combination. And so some of these have kind of crazy names, but for example, my cruise arrow mode, if I then apply and show only, what that's going to do, and that should certainly be showing the wing. I'm sorry, this is another bug that I've run into that I think I just caused recently. So the wing is actually shown, but it's unfortunately in the wrong state. So let's just change that back to normal. Let's select all and make them normal. I've got something wrong with how I'm previewing dgen geoms. So when that switched to showing the dgen set of cruise wings, it didn't visualize them right. So I need to chase that down. Okay, so that would be the cruise arrow in this model. We've got hover arrow, and then we've got, different things. And I'm really kind of slicing this onion thin. Again, you'll see why later, for things like, here's just the stowed props and other things that I'll show. But modes allow us to control, both the state of the model and the components that we're interested in. And that's really the bottom line. So I'm finished a little bit faster than I thought. I'm happy to take any questions here in the background if anybody has any questions in the chat.
For the demo, I haven't seen any specific requests, but we'll let things catch up online here just a little bit. All right, well, we got about 10 minutes before our next scheduled presentation. Rob, if there's anything that, let's see, a question just came up, says, can you also change the size of propellers? Yes,
Yeah,
you certainly can.
So certainly let me show this prop and let me change back to a cruise mode. Or variable presets. We'll just come back in here and apply our cruise state of the model. And let's just show all. So here's the complete model. And certainly, if you want to change the propeller, you can come in and on the design tab, here's the diameter of the propeller. So in this case, this model looks to be in inches. So let's just make it 90% the size that it is by multiplying it by 0.9. And so we can change the size of the propeller. And if we wanted to make that a part of the variable presets, we could certainly come in and we could say, just as a demo, we could have, okay, we had a configuration variable preset. Let's go with something like rotor size. So we'll add that group. Now we have a rotor size group and it doesn't have any variables in it yet. We're going to want to put diameter in that as a setting or as a variable to be set. We'll have small, as a small rotor, and we'll add that, and that's the current setting. And we'll add another one, and we'll say normal. We can add that, and then we'll come in here, and we need to apply a value. So we're going to multiply that by, divide it by 0.9. And so then we'll update that setting, and then we'll have a large. And so we'll make it again 10% bigger by dividing by 0.9. And we will add large as that value. So now we have small, normal, and large. And so now we can come back and say, okay, rotor size normal, we want to apply that. Rotor size small, we can apply that. Configuration stowed, we can apply that. So, any parm we can put in to a variable preset, and then we can use that, of course, in a mode or use it in any of these ways. So yeah, the analyses do have access to modes. So for example, any analysis that you do, it should come in, and you should be able to come in, say, to comp geom, and you can either choose the sets that you want to apply to, or you can choose the mode. So for example, in this case, if I want to do comp geom on my, my cruise air, let's not do that one. Let's do stowed tilting. Well, we can choose whichever one makes sense. And I'm just thinking about these different ones. They're a little bit complicated. Again, I'll show you later in the day. But if we want to do that on that comp geom, then we can come and just run comp geom on that mode. And so it will apply those variable presets and select that set and then run whichever analysis. And that's going to be true for all of the different analyses. If you come in and you want to do any of these analyses, they should all have, if you want to do projected area, you can come in and you can choose the mode for the target geometry. If there's something where you have to choose two different sets, like in this case, you choose a target set and a boundary set, then you don't get to choose two different modes, right? Because if you did, you can imagine if one of these was in hover and one of these was in cruise, that would be completely inconsistent. So anytime you have to choose two groups of geometry, you don't get to choose mode twice. You only get to choose mode once. But then you can still choose the set for the secondary geometry in something like projected area analysis.